Dealing with dinos, this is your look at the news stories Harryhausen 1 million years BC, the Allosaurus 32 centimeter vinyl figure. Star Ace Toys, in conjunction with the Ray and Diana Harryhausen Foundation and 20th Century Fox, celebrates the 100th anniversary of Ray Harryhausen as stop-motion animation pioneer, with a series of finely detailed replicas featuring Harryhausen's most iconic creature creations. 1 million years BC from 1966 features a famous showdown between Tumok, played by John Richardson, and the Allosaurus, just one of the many Harryhausen special effect dinosaurs populating that prehistoric fantasy world. Before we get a closer look at the Allosaurus, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall it actually stands. While I'm getting that in order, I'd like to send out a big thank you to the folks over at Star Ace that provided the sample of the Allosaurus that we're having a look at in this review. Not only did they send the Allosaurus, which is the standard release, but they also took the time and sent over the deluxe set, which happens to come included with Tumok, which we'll have a look at in a second. The Allosaurus stands 10.5 or 10.5 inches in height. We can go ahead and switch that to centimeters, revealing that the Allosaurus is 26.7 centimeters tall. We're going to go ahead and switch that back to inches. Should you be in the market and pick this one up for yourself and decide to get the deluxe release, you'll probably want to know how big Tumok is. So we'll go ahead and stop the tape measure right at the very top of his head. There we go. And again, according to the readout, you're looking at Tumok, the little tiny caveman who could. You're seeing him as being a 5.3, almost 5.5 inch tall figure. And switch that again to centimeters, then you're looking at Tumok being 13.4, so almost 13.5 centimeters in height. Each of the figures come with their own dedicated display stand, and again, if you're in the market picking this one up for yourself and fortunate enough to find the deluxe set, well then you're not only going to be getting the Allosaurus with his own footprint stand, but you're also going to be getting the exclusive Tumok figure that comes also with his own display stand. Why don't we start with the review there? We'll pick up the stand that comes included with Tumok. As you can see, flipping it upside down, it's all made of brown plastic, and it does have 4 conveniently placed rubberized feet on the bottom. I've said in the past, one good thing that works to the benefit of having these extra rubber feet is if you are shifting this around on a surface, you're not going to be scratching the surface, the tabletop, the shelf space that you decide to put this down. But one thing it also helps to aid is it prevents the scratching away of the paint. If you are somebody that moves the stands around, the last thing you certainly would not want is have this paint, the printing of the 1 million years BC and Tumok, have that rubbed away. So again, those rubber feet help to basically protect 2 different surfaces. Speaking of surfaces, though, as you can see, it's been made in brown plastic, but there's a whole lot of extra paint that's been added onto it. The gray has been generously applied to the surface of it, but not enough that it covers off all the aspects of the brown. So the little scratchings of brown still manage to peek their way up, as well as you can see there's the stump of the tree located along the back. It's a simple enough display stand. It doesn't need to be overly complicated, but I feel it's effective by its construction. We can go ahead then and take the statue of Tumok, and you can actually put him on top. Now, there's only a couple of places that he fits the best. I find it works best to actually have him facing sideways, because then he has the greatest amount of footprint space to work from. If you kind of have him facing forward, then of course he's going to be leaning off the edge and butting up against the back of the tree. And again, if you have him rotated this way, well, you could probably do about the same thing this way as well. Let's put the stand to the side and get a closer look here at Tumok. Now, Tumok here, of course, in the movie itself, is played by John Richardson. Now, I do feel like as a little small representation of the caveman Tumok, he does a pretty good job of it. You can see the detailing on his face, for example, is pretty good, actually. Even things that I would expect could be a problem, like his eyes, for example, are so small, and yet, if you look at it real closely, I think Star Ace has done a really good job on the actual eyes, giving us not only irises, but also pupils, for again, something that you could say would be smaller than the size of a pinhead. Spinning the statue around, you can see some nice additional grays that they've added to an otherwise brown hairstyle here. Also, the same can be applied for also his beard. There's a little bit of extra gray that's been added in there as well. A couple of different mediums at play here. Of course, you've got the main majority of the caveman all done in plastic, but then he does also have the fur I'm assuming not real fur, but fur nonetheless has been draped across his shoulders and across the lower section of his waist. Underneath that, of course, he has kind of a faux leather loincloth. In case you are curious, I'm not sure why you would be, but if you flip it up, yes, Tumok actually isn't wearing anything underneath that. But I do like the fact that they did use other materials here and not simply just plastic. The idea of having like a faux leather material as well as that faux fur definitely does work well for this. Yeah, as you can see, it has a rather long spear in hand. Detail on the wood handle is pretty good as well. And you can see the carved stone that he uses for the end spear tip has also been painted nicely as well. Again, if you decide to go the route of picking this one up for yourself, I would really recommend the idea of going the deluxe route, simply just because, yes, the Allosaurus looks fine and good, and we're going to really get into the details of how good this guy looks in hand. But I always feel like it's good to kind of get things like this, where you get an extra thing for the Allosaurus to be looking on. And again, the way that you can display it on your shelf, you can put Tumok down on his display stand, and then, of course, you can then turn around the Allosaurus so it's facing him head on. Now we can get a closer look at the Allosaurus, and as I had said before, both of them come with their own designated display stands. The Allosaurus, though, is slightly different than the one that comes for Tumok. For example, when you look at the stand, it already has a very automatic, obvious idea as to where the footprint is going to go. Yes, you're simply just going to be lining it up here. What you also do see is a nice little front placard to the stand showcasing the movie in which the characters are based from. You've got 1 million years BC, all done in a very nice gold paint. And it's actually been raised as well. Hopefully you guys can see that well enough. It's lifted from the rest of the stone facing. Again, similar enough to the stand that came with Tumok. We flip it around. On the bottom, you've got 1 million years BC Allosaurus statue. And then you've got Star Ace down below there. So again, the paint applied is about the same as the caveman. You're essentially starting with a basic brown plastic stand, and then very carefully they've brushed on top of it the gray. So again, still some of those brown details pop through and gives you some level of contrast, and it really then allows the details on it to stand out a lot more. Now, as for the stand itself, the whole idea behind it, I'm going to go ahead and pick up the Allosaurus. The idea is you're really supposed to be able to fit the paw. Can we call it a paw? The claw, the bottom foot. You're supposed to fit it in between. And it's not a perfect fit necessarily. Like there's a little bit of clearance that's allotted. I know what you're probably thinking. Well, maybe it's supposed to go on the other foot. Well, yes, you could put it on technically the other foot as well. But the foot spread is it's not as wide necessarily as this footprint right here. So again, this fits in place. And the intended plan, I suppose, is when you are putting the foot of the Allosaurus into the stand, it's supposed to keep it really upright, and I find I can't quite pull that off. I thought it was the case maybe I just need to apply a little bit more pressure, and once it got firmly planted into the base, it would be enough then to keep the tail up, because I think the plan is supposed to look like this, but unfortunately, I don't know, I just can't seem to get it to stay upright. All the times I try to put it down on the display stand, ultimately what ends up happening is it starts here, and then ends up dropping down to the tail. What I may end up finding myself doing, it's not a case where I feel like it's lifting the base up, but I might maybe just take a little bit of like a clear tack and just put it underneath the foot, for example, just enough to kind of keep it planted more so to the surface that I've got it displayed on, enough to keep the tail up. Because I think really where the appeal of this comes is the fact that you can see the tail lifted off from the ground. As it stands right now, I can't quite get that, and every single time I try, the tail seems to drop back down and hit leveled flat to whatever surface I decide to put him on. Despite whatever issues I've had keeping the tail off the ground, there's no denying the fact that that's a good-looking Allosaurus, and it looks like it was pulled directly from the screen of the movie, 1 million years BC. Now, when you really put things into perspective, back then, to pull off a creature effect like this of something that was actually living, breathing, and moving, obviously they didn't have CG, obviously they didn't have animatronics, they had to do it the old-fashioned way of a meticulous artist going in there, or talented artist going in there meticulously, moving limbs independently, like his hand, his arms, for example, the elbows, and even moving around facial features to pull off that living look. Now, obviously, they can't quite pull that off with this particular statue, as what we're getting here is a staction release of that very same Allosaurus from 1 million years BC, but it doesn't mean necessarily that there doesn't have the life and the personality that that puppet would have possessed. Now you can see, like, there's a whole lot of cool details that they incorporated. More so what I'm really looking at when I'm seeing this statue is a lot of texture work when it comes to the scales, for example. I'm guessing the majority of this has all been cast in gray, and then they've gone in there and airbrushed areas like its underbelly, for example, adding some much needed additional yellow. Speaking of also yellow, you can see the eyes, for example, on both sides. Let's spin this around so you guys see it on both sides. Nice bright yellow eyes with very dark pupils staring right at you. The teeth, as you can see, are all independently sculpted, all independently painted, and they aren't sharp, just in case you're curious. One little touch I do enjoy that they did was they lifted the tongue just on the end, as opposed to just having tongue simply flat and sculpted in with the rest of the mouth. It actually looks like the tongue is a separate appliance, and that's also been painted a different color than the rest of the dark, rusted red that they used for its gums. One of my favorite parts of the mold on the Allosaurus has got to be, I guess you could consider that to be his gullet, the part just underneath his bottom chin. You can see these individual flaps and folds of skin just add a nice contrast, not only the way that they're sculpted, but also the way that they're painted. And while like the majority of it is all done in this dark gray, the gullet, as well as the rest of its body, at least underbelly, is given a different treatment, almost like a mustard yellow. Starts at the very top, just underneath the jaw, and it continues its way across the belly and to where the tail then extends out, spirals its way out, until finally finishing off at the very tip of the tail. Now, even though technically, like, that's the only place where there is a little bit of color, and all the rest of it is still relegated to gray, I do like the fact that Starry's added a sheen, a gloss coat over top of it. It just adds a little bit of extra personality as opposed to just outright giving it a matte coat paint. So adding a little bit of that adds a almost slick and wet look to the Allosaurus and really does make it come alive. Again, when it comes to picking this statue up for yourself, you can either, again, go the route of just picking up the Allosaurus, but I would definitely say consider the idea of going with the deluxe route, only because you also do get the accompanying mini figure, smaller figure of Tumok, just allowing then for a nice little diorama scene. It's not to say necessarily that the Allosaurus can't work well on his own, but I think by incorporating Tumok into it, you're also establishing a scene, very faithfully recreated here from the folks over at Starrace. In the early days of making movie monsters, back then, if you wanted to make yourself a somewhat believable on-screen creature, you didn't have animatronics or CG at your disposal because neither of which existed back then. If you wanted to make yourself a somewhat believable creature, you had to go the old-fashioned route, and studios often at times made giant props that would interact with the actors or actresses on screen, and admittingly, yes, half the time they looked absolutely ridiculous. Okay, most of the time they looked absolutely ridiculous. Or you could also enlist the help of talented stop-motion animators like Ray Harryhausen. Ray Harryhausen back in the 60s would have meticulously taken models and moved their arms and legs frame by frame until enough of those frames you could put together and you had a living creature that was actually moving on its own. Stop motion animation is one of those dying arts you never see anymore in movies. In fact, nowadays it's so easy to produce everything with computer graphics that when I do see a movie that uses stop motion, I have to stop for a second and actually think to myself, I can't believe they're actually using stop motion, and I say that actually in a good way. Movies like A Nightmare Before Christmas, the whole movie is stop motion animation. Movies that have used it, like Army of Darkness, Gremlins, and RoboCop 2, are all cases when I look at it. There's something charming. It's dated, yes, but there's something charming about the idea that they would have actually used somebody, brought them in, and had them meticulously move those little models around, again, frame by frame. It's something I wish more movies would do more of, because again, it's one of those dying arts. Now, of course, when it comes to the Harryhausen release here of the Allosaurus, Starrace, of course, pays tribute to the pioneer of stop-motion animation, giving us a fantastic-looking Allosaurus. And if you get the deluxe release, you, of course, get yourself Tumok, which is the little caveman he could be fighting against. I think the paint on this guy is really good. I didn't, in final looks, of course, include Tumok, simply just because he was taking up a lot of space on his own, that Allosaurus, that is. But if you do get yourself the deluxe release, you benefit, of course, from getting the Tumok that you can actually have them displayed with. Both figures are nicely painted, lots of rich detail added here to the Allosaurus. Admittingly, the only problem I have with the Allosaurus is that his tail always wants to drop and hit the ground. That I get the idea that they wanted to use that display stand with that footprint that allowed the Allosaurus to step into it. And I guess the theory was that the tail was going to be lifted off the ground. Whatever time I've tried to actually do that, the end result is always the same. The Allosaurus's tail always ends up sitting against whatever place I end up displaying this. It's not a big deal because really at the end of the day, I'm just thrilled the fact that we finally get ourselves Ray Harryhausen statues. And again, for the piece that we get here, the kind of introductory piece, I suppose, I think this is the first one that they've done. It really did turn out really nice. And I'm looking forward to putting this one on display. Let me know down below in the comment section what you guys think of the Allosaurus, the deluxe set, of course, that came included with Tumok. A big thank you again to the folks over at Starrays that provided the sample that we had a look at in this review. As the question for this review is, what is your favorite movie that features stop-motion animation? I know it's kind of hard to pinpoint one because so often at times nowadays they're using animated, like CG animation for all of their effects. But what is your favorite movie that features stop-motion animation? Let me know down below in the comments section. If you guys are also new to the channel and you're liking all the content you're seeing, consider the idea of hitting that subscribe button down below. Turn the bell notification on and keep your peepers peeled, because there's definitely going to be a lot more videos coming your way. We're also going to be having a look at some more Starrays releases, so if you're a big fan of Starrays like I am, keep again those peepers peeled, because there's going to be a lot of videos heading your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.